Hello, everyone. Can you hear me fine? Awesome. Thank you so much. So I guess I'll do this without slides. I have super bad karma with slides this week. So I was speaking on UTXO this weekend, and I blew up my laptop, so I brought my iPad. I didn't realize that I'm not going to have the reduction for that, so I didn't have slides for the presentation. And now I've sent over the presentation to the organizing team, but because of my mistake, the presentation was locked. So, this as compared to maybe some other presentations, I'm not going to introduce you to some super complex concept right here, which needs some super complex diagrams. I'm going to try to provoke some thoughts in our collective minds, because you all are brilliant engineers and brilliant builders in this space. So most of what I would like you to think about is actually in your head. I just want you to think about it perhaps from a new perspective, and perhaps come to maybe a new conclusions in a way. And by the way, first of all, thank you so much for showing up so early. It's the first day. It's like one of the first presentations in the day, and there's quite a few people, so you're absolute legends. Thank you for that. And so a brief introduction about myself. I'm Steve. I'm Steve and co-founder of Pwn protocol. Maybe you can see our logo somewhere on the sponsors panel. Yeah, one of them. There we go. That's us. So Pwn is a lending protocol that we've been building since early 2021. It's a generalized lending protocol that essentially means our key advantage is that you can literally take anything out of the box, anything that is in some way standardized, and you can use that as collateral and take out a loan, get the sweet liquidity for whatever you might need in your either daily activities, DeFi activities, whatever you need. We also do not enforce strong rules about the terms of the loan, whatever is the interest, whatever is going to be the credit. So it's like a super flexible lending protocol. But I'm not here to shield the protocol whatsoever. I just wanted to kind of point out that everything we do revolves around the concept of lending, borrowing, and debt in general. When I was invited by Joseph Jelacic, who's definitely somewhere around here, you will definitely meet him as well, to co-found this company, what became super interesting to me right off the bat was the fact that we're building something that's potentially touching, like if scaled up enough, and hopefully beyond the space of quote-unquote just DeFi into the general public, through the fact that we deal with debt. And debt is something that we all are somewhat reliant to some degree. I would even say some of us might be almost addicted. Actually, the first slide that I have in my presentation is like that a lot of people are, or like something like we all are addicted to debt in a way. So through our product, I'm hopeful that we will be able to like positively influence potentially everybody on the planet. And let me explain why that's a thing. So as I said, the first slide says that we all are addicted to debt in a way. And some of you might be reliant on the mechanism of debt directly because you have some loan open somewhere, be it your commercial bank. In the better scenario, you have an open loan position somewhere in DeFi. But there might be some of you who do not have any outstanding debt. Maybe you've been managing your money so well that you don't have any outstanding debt. But even then, I would like to ask you, where does your income come from? So typically, if you backtrack the flow of money that ends up in your wallet, so let's say you're a co-founder of a VC-backed startup. Then if you backtrack the flow of money long enough, you will realize that at some point there is liquidity being sourced through some sort of a debt instrument. If you're working maybe a traditional job, quote unquote traditional job, then I'm willing to bet anything that the corporation where you work is funding at least portion of their operations through some sort of a debt instrument as well. So And then even then, if you can claim that you still are not even in this way reliant on the existence of debt. Unfortunately, because of the concept of national states, so for example, here in Czech Republic, every single citizen of the country owns, quote unquote, the share of the governmental debt, which I believe at this point is something about $10,000 per person or something along those lines. So there are many ways where we are influenced by debt directly or indirectly. Sometimes we can do something about it. Sometimes we cannot do anything about it. And like for a second, imagine what would happen if debt as a thing, or if debt disappeared, if there was no more opportunities to get a loan from anybody, no more new funding. I think we don't need to debate that much that like the society as we know it currently would probably very quickly just disintegrate completely. So the bad news is that, as I've hopefully currently demonstrated, either directly or indirectly, we are all heavily reliant on the concept of debt. The good news, though, is that the rules are not necessarily fixed. Like the rules of the game, how the debt works, is not fixed. However, I feel like lately we've come to a point where many people simply consider things to be given. Like, and I'm gonna demonstrate a few examples where we consider something as very much given, but if you think about it for a few seconds, you'll realize that most of the rules of the system are rules of thumb at best. So one of the concepts is that we're being ruled by the 2%. And by that, I don't mean the top 2 wealthiest percent, even though that's a separate debate that we could have. We are ruled by 2%, which is the target inflation rate set up by, this is the target that most central banks in most developed economies are aiming for, roughly 2%. So have you ever thought about why is it 2%? Why specifically 2%? Why is everybody aligned on this goal? Why is that something that the central bank sometimes is following religiously, sometimes is following loosely, but it's there as one of the I guess parameters that heavily influence how much access to credit a regular person can get, in a way, directly or indirectly. So if you go to, for example, the Czech central bank, you will find out that they describe it in like a super short paragraph as something that they follow because every other developed economy follows this rule. So it's like, okay, interesting. So then you go to, for example, European Union and the ECB, and they have put a little bit more effort into explaining why it's 2%. But it's just a word fluff. They don't really. It's a bunch of rationalizations. They try to say something so it looks like they know what they're doing. But if you really like carefully read what they're saying, it's just word fluff. They're saying something about this 2% offering some sort of a I guess reasonable buffer towards deflation. And I personally believe that like at least a little bit of inflation is probably better than deflation. But like, why specifically 2%, right? Is there any like any studies? Is there any mathematical formula that can like demonstrate why this has been designed as 2%? The reality is that the answer is no. If you look at the US government, for example, the US government has kind of officially adopted the 2% rule in the first half of the previous century. After New Zealand in 1920s, roughly, the New Zealand government essentially came up with a set of rules that they essentially wanted to regulate their central banking a little bit, and they literally just made that number up. They were like, we need to put some number here. 2% looks about right. let's make it 2%. And then every other English-speaking country very quickly adopted this number without really asking, like, what does it mean? What does it really influence? And then it kind of spread through the narrative of like developed economy. So as you can see, this is probably one of the most important numbers that a central bank is working with, and it's completely arbitrary. It's just completely arbitrary, and the other central banks are kind of like just repeating it after each other. Again, as I was just saying, thankfully the rules are not set in stone. Another super quick example of this principle is the typical mortgage duration. So if you take out a mortgage in most developed economies, you will be looking at something like the bank is typically going to push you towards, if possible, towards 30 years duration. Of course, you can get an exemption, you can get a longer one, you can get a shorter one. There are some banks experimenting with the concept of like multi-generational mortgages. But again, like, why is it 30 years? Why is it kind of set up on this number and nobody's really questioning it? The reality, again, is that in the very early days, the mortgage has been, at least in the US market, for example, has been a 5-year loan where you only paid interest for the first 5 years, and then you repaid the entire principal on the final year at the date of the expiration of the loan. So, and then it kind of evolved from 10 years to 15 years to like 20 now 30. So again, it's something that's like super important for deciding like how big of a loan we can take out, what's going to be the installment that we pay back, you know, what's the value of the house that we will be able to buy with this mortgage. Yet again, it seems to be somewhat arbitrary. It seems to be something that's been developing over the years. And again, people seem to be kind of like blindly accepting as a fact, but the reality is that it is not set in stone. We can change it. And that's essentially the grow of this presentation, is that what we're building here in DeFi at this very moment. We're heavily focused, or at least it feels to me like we're heavily focused on potentially bringing new, super exciting technology to life, which, by the way, is a good thing in my opinion. It's like a fantastic thing, and funny enough, actually, I was talking here at ETH Prague last year, and I was talking about how a lot of protocols and projects tend to attempt to reinvent the wheel when it comes to the user experience of the platform. You know, the UI elements that we show to the users, the flow, how we lead the user through, I guess, the user journey of our applications. And that's like the last thing that you should be trying to reinvent, because a lot of those concepts in like UX come from human psychology, which hasn't really developed that much over the past, I don't know, like, well, just a handful of years, right? So what we should really proactively strive to reinvent, like very actively and potentially very radically, are the economical mechanisms. So when you look at the mortgage, like one of the first, if you attend any class related to corporate finance, one of the very first lessons that the textbooks or professors are going to try to teach you is that you should always match the duration of the liability, aka of the loan, that you're using to finance some productive asset. So let's say you're buying a vehicle for your business or something. You're expecting this vehicle to be operational for like 15 years maybe. Now I'm kind of making it up, but as an example, it's going to serve well. You will be using this vehicle for 15 years. You expect it to last for 15 years. And so the liability, the loan that you take out, should ideally match this duration. So it should be ideally also 15 years. So why is there a thing such as house that can potentially, if well maintained, which of course is a little bit of a cost, but the core of the house is probably gonna last, I don't know, like 100 plus years or something like that. So why are we trying to like so hard? And it's typically something that you would pass on to your children or throughout your family or something like that. So why would you try so hard to like repay everything in the first 30 years? And that is only if you're young enough to still apply for the 30 years mortgage, right? So I guess from the historical principle, most of the lending and borrowing has been done in like a peer-to-peer manner. It was me, lending some grain to my neighbor when their yield from their little farm was not as good this year, and otherwise they would starve to death or something like that. And then I personally expected to kind of like soft expected. It's not like we signed any contract usually. If you actually look at the history of like how the first debts originated, it was like a favor rather than like an actual like a legal contract binding them to some repayment. But I soft expected them to like provide a favor back to me whenever I am in a need in the future. And so this is changing significantly because the biggest lenders in the world currently are becoming individual institutions with like massive capital, of course, like political connections, etc., etc. Yet we are getting much closer to the model, which is like way more binding contractually. It's protecting the lender much more as opposed to potentially taking care of the borrower, etc., etc. Blockchain, in a way, is actually making this even worse a little bit. Because obviously blockchain fundamentally is this immutable ledger that's publicly available. So if I ever borrow something, it's essentially forever going to be there, unless, of course, the protocol is, for example, designed in a way where there can be some sort of a jubilee and the debt can be forgotten. But that's not necessarily a thing in the space right now. So what I'm trying to say is that we're moving into the era where most of the lending is done by a handful of very powerful individual institutions. I'm probably going to get a co-speaker soon. Yet we're moving towards a setup where the borrower is potentially getting into a lot of trouble. And so what I would like to, I guess, leave you with is the thought of the fact that whatever we build, no matter how potentially small or big innovation, there is the concept of like path dependency. You might or might not realize that, but whatever we're building is going to have such a huge impact on the future generations. And while we are significantly improving the technology, we should also keep in mind that we need to very proactively build in the humanity into the protocols that we are building. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for the slides. I'll post a blog post that might be a slightly more coherent than my stream of consciousness right now. So if you wanna, I should have like a speaker bio on the website. So if you wanna read that, just check out my Twitter. Otherwise, I'll be here for DeFi Summit as well as Eat Prague and all the way to the after party on Sunday. So I'm more than happy to talk with any of you about the philosophy.
Hi, thanks for the talk. So you mentioned this arbitrarily set parameters like 2% interest rate or inflation rate or 30% mortgage duration. But I'm thinking, okay, doesn't it apply to basically any complex systems that we design? There are many parameters that just have to be set up well enough. Like why did Satoshi Nakamoto choose 10-minute block time for Bitcoin? Why did like Ethereum chose 15 seconds? Or all these parameters, they are not fundamentally explained. It's just some number that was chosen reasonably well and the system works. So why doesn't this apply also to legacy finance?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I'm definitely not gonna get myself into the trouble of explaining Satoshi's choices here. But if you think about it, the problem is not that there was something set up kind of arbitrarily. The problem is that everybody seems to be following it like almost religiously, and that's what I'm kind of trying to imply, that we should also experiment with perhaps moving around with those parameters, perhaps using completely different set of parameters, just like the previous ones were kind of set up arbitrarily. I think we have and like this moment when we are developing the technology that inevitably the TradFi space is gonna adopt from us or steal from us or fork from us or inspire themselves. if we build in the inherent like philosophical principles as well, they will kind of be forced in a way to also adopt that. So it's kind of like a little bit of a Trojan horse which we can build into whatever we're currently building, and then kind of force the TradFi world to also adopt that.